This afternoon, you're going to hear a bit more about this report that we've put together. It's the product of a task force that has been working the past 6 months to inquire into the prospects of pandemic recovery in Australia. It's a task force last year through a similar task force which investigated how Australia could re-engage with the world during COVID-19. And today you'll be hearing a little bit more about the report, its provenance, its recommendations. You'll be hearing very shortly from our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Mark Scott. Also, the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury, Andrew Lee, MP, and a panel featuring a number of our task force members and a student representative from the University of Sydney. But before we get into all of that, it's my great pleasure to welcome Yvonne Weldon, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, and Yvonne will be giving us a welcome to country. Will you please join me in welcoming Yvonne Weldon?
Hello, sisters and brothers, gender neutral and gender fluid. As was said, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman from Cowra here in New South Wales. I'm from the waters of the Clare, which later became known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee rivers. I am the elected Deputy Chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the cultural authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land we're on. I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations, to you and the ancestors' lands you travelled from. The boundaries of our traditional owners are not defined by the hand or by the pen, but through the natural landscapes of the earth. The Ora Nation's country covers the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. My people have practiced our traditions for thousands of years and endless generations. One tradition shared in various forms across Australia is a welcome to country. It is more than just words, it is a spiritual process for honouring their ancestors' footsteps we are all walking in, continuing the practice of the many generations before us to the many generations to come. My people have been a part of this land for more than 65,000 years. We are the oldest living culture of the world. And on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with this land, our Mother Earth. The First Nations of this continent are the most resilient, unique and sustainable people on the planet. For my people to survive for as long as we have, it's been through a continual practice of respect, collaboration, understanding and a willingness to come together. As we're joined here and virtually today, and to give respect and honour, could you all please pause for a moment to remember the many sacrifices that have been made along the way, the ones we continue to make, and those we shouldn't have to. The challenges that we all are faced with today is not the same as it was only a few years ago, yet it has become an accepted norm. It brings a disadvantage that flows on from one generation to the next. The cycle doesn't only change because of policy or legislation or even reports. The battles through the endurance of adversity is our greatest evidence that needs to be included in all research and all our work. But it cannot always be about data and the bottom line. Our lived experience must be included as well. Human life and people's opportunity, or lack thereof, cannot be rationalised but will never be equal. Especially for our younger generations. What hope do we give them? So as you connect, learn and share, today, tomorrow and beyond, know that everyone's well-being is more important than the material things in this world. There are so many factors that can impact us, such as our history can affect our future. So no matter what walks of life we all come from, we all need to support each other, bringing out hidden heartaches to share and bringing us all a strength together. The road travelled alone is the longest, hardest road there is. Don't do it on your own. I will join you and you can join me. The greatest gift you can ever give someone is your time. For so many of you supporting others, you often take on more than just a job, and it can stay with you long after clocking off. You all have an important role in so many people's lives. This should be recognised. You are recognised, and I thank you. So whether it's through your work, your family, your networks, or even your research, creating an inclusion, an acceptance, and a resilience, all of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations. We are in this together. And this year, we had the theme of Reconciliation Week was Be Brave, Make Change, and NAIDOC, which was Get Up, Stand Up, and Show Up. We all can make positive change, not just through themes, but through our actions, each and every day. But know that the answers to the questions about my people not only needs to have, but we should have the voice of Aboriginal people first, because we are the first people of this country. Then we can truly walk together when this recognition is truly accepted. So with that said, let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Yvonne. Well, thank you so much for that welcome to country, Yvonne, and for those reflections too on the experience of First Peoples, experiences that I know the task force group certainly considered in its deliberations and is reflected in its report being released today. Let me tell you a bit more about this task force behind this great Australian renovation report. As I mentioned, it brings together leaders from a number of fields and domains, including business, civil society and academia. You'll see on screen very shortly a snapshot of the membership of the task force. This reflects our belief that the University of Sydney and the Sydney Policy Lab has a role in convening conversations, in bringing together partners in the community to engage in conversations about the public good and the future of our country. Since April this year, we've conducted a range of conversations, including 3 expert consultations with people from various fields, 2 workshops, and a roundtable. And the question that we investigated was, how do we build Australia back better from the pandemic? And we found that 3 priorities emerged through the conversations that we had, which are reflected in the report. One priority is about the future of children and young people. Children and young people have been the forgotten heroes of this pandemic alongside our frontline healthcare workers. Their needs not always prioritised, their voices not always heard. We hope that this view comes across the report that we're releasing today. The second priority for us was that of trust, the need for us to rebuild trust in government, in science, in experts, in our public institutions. A challenge, by the way, that exists across all democracies in this current time. A third priority for us was around social cohesion and the challenge here of rebuilding our society and ensuring that the social division and inequality that was generated or magnified by the pandemic would be fixed through concerted societal action. They're very quickly some of the priorities that we have explored in our work and has informed the recommendations that we have put forward in our report. I mentioned earlier the QR code and our platform civility. Just another quick reminder, if you haven't had a chance yet to log in, we will be asking you questions throughout the conversation, and it'd be great to have you participate, and especially as this was part of the methodology that we used in the task force in generating conversations across various divides. Well, it's now my pleasure to invite our Vice-Chancellor and President to formally open proceedings today. For those of you joining us from outside the university, our Vice-Chancellor, Mark Scott, joined the University of Sydney last year in July, and prior to that was the Secretary of the New South Wales Department of Education, and of course the Managing Director of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation as well. Mark, it's a real pleasure to have you join us today to open proceedings for this launch. Will you please welcome Professor Mark Scott?
Thanks, Tim, and ladies and gentlemen, wonderful to be with you. Can I also acknowledge traditional owners on the land in which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and thank you, Yvonne, for that welcome this afternoon. And thank you also, Tim, for convening us all here and for your leadership work in pulling together this Open Society Common Purpose Task Force, and for the enlightening report that's with us today. And like everyone else here and watching online, I look forward to hearing the expert panel as they gather. I've been saying recently that universities need to be seen to be in the solutions business. If you're involved in a university, if you're doing research here, if you're doing teaching here, if you're part of our professional staff, you can be beset at times by the challenges it takes in running a large, complex organisation like this. But fundamentally, our contribution to society is using the deep disciplinary expertise we have, the deep insights that we have, to not just diagnose the challenges that are taking place in society, but to bring concrete solutions together and to earn our seat at the table by the insights that we bring and the practical guidance that we bring to help improve the world for the common good. One of the great advantages of a university like Sydney is not just our research depth and our scale, but that the fact we are truly multidisciplinary, that we can truly convene deep disciplinary experts from such a wide array, and it's the alchemy of bringing them together, the sparking of ideas that come with people presenting their own insights from their own frame of reference in their own world, that you often find innovative and different solutions to long, intractable problems that we face. So I'm very pleased that this report has taken place, and we've been able to draw expertise from within the university, but expertise from outside the university in a genuine partnership in pursuit of meaningful problems and meaningful solutions to the challenges that we face. The old newspaper editor in me was delighted to see the word renovation on the front, because I know that there is no limit to interest on real estate stories anywhere in the Australian media, and by putting the word renovation on the front, you're sure to drive an active and dynamic readership of this important report. I think we've all reflected on the experience of the last few years, and one of the things that I think is very clear is the pandemic revealed the underlying condition. Many of the issues identified in the report here are not new per se, and many people working deeply in the field have been long aware of the challenges they present to society, but the pandemic revealed these issues in stark relief. Our trust in institutions, our trust in science, the rights and interests, the pressures that are at bear on young people and children in our society, and the level of inequality, social division, the lack of social cohesion, all revealed starkly by the events of the past 2 years. And what I think is noteworthy of the work of the Sydney Policy Lab is that I think throughout the past 2 years they've been pushing the thinking ahead. Last year, when they started really addressing the challenges of opening up our economy, opening up our community after the lockdowns, I think they were leaders of that conversation. And then I think now leading the conversation again on how we rebuild better after the great exhaustion, after the great disruption, how we learn from this experience to be stronger and more robust and to be bold in the reform that we put in place. I'm delighted that we're able to host this conversation today at the university, and I was reflecting in the last week, we've had numbers of conversations that just reveal the complexity of what we're dealing with. Many at the university remain deeply involved in the work on managing the pandemic. Robin Ward, our Executive Dean of Medicine and Health, is here, and so many members of that faculty, amongst others, are deeply involved in the ongoing response to the pandemic. Emma Johnston, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, is here, one of the co-authors of the State of the Environment report that says climate just remains such a pressing and overwhelming challenge for us as a society now and for decades ahead. I just met with the ambassador from Ukraine at the time, at a meeting here earlier today, and just again reflecting on the great challenge of a European war, the first European war for 70 years and all the pressure that brings to bear. and that you add on top of the pandemic, climate, the European war, all the challenges that exist in our region, in our relationships in the Pacific, our relationships with China. And then, if that's not enough for you, we just a touch of foot and mouth, a reference to monkeypox, and the ongoing challenges that we've dealt with for a long period of time, increasing levels of inequality, the profound challenge about closing the gap. These are the most complex times imaginable. And we had the Secretary of the Department of Treasury in Canberra here speaking last week, and I was talking with him and was thinking, has there been any time in the last 50 years, 70 years, 100 years where there's been such an array of complexity across a range of public policy areas that is demanding well-considered solutions from the finest minds in our community? Well, that's what we're facing today, and that's what this report addresses as well. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to the university to hear the great minds engage in the great challenges of our time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Well, thank you very much, Mark, and a powerful reminder there of how we live in uncertain and indeed unusual times, and all the more reason for those of us involved in academic work and research to think about how we can contribute to solving some of society's biggest problems. As Mark says, we are in the solutions business. Very shortly, you'll hear from the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury, the Honourable Andrew Lee MP. But before we do, let me take you through some of the solutions that we are proposing through this task force report about that problem of rebuilding from the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, our priorities were around children and young people, trust and social cohesion. On the young people and children front, we're recommending the creation of a youth fund, similar to the Future Fund, which would strategically invest in the needs of future generations in Australia. We're also calling for youth to have a say in national affairs through the creation of an independent advisory body to the federal government to ensure that youth perspectives are included. We've heard that saying before, that children should be seen and not heard. For the last 2.5 years, they've been neither seen nor heard, and it is time for us to fix that and to ensure intergenerational justice. I won't go through all of the recommendations in detail. That, of course, is something you can do when you go through our report in your own time, but wanted to highlight too a number of recommendations we're making about restoring trust in our public institutions. We're calling, for example, for more cooperative national leadership, including the institution of a new annual State of the Nation address. It's remarkable right now in Australian life that the biggest address we have is the budget speech every year, a financialisation, if you will, of our public conversation. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a State of the Nation address that brings together the Prime Minister, the Premiers of the states, the Chief Ministers of the territories and other community leaders to focus national attention on the big picture? That's one recommendation we make. We've also recommended the creation of a Minister for Integrity and Accountability. Obviously, lots of debate at the moment about the creation of an Integrity and Anti-Corruption Commission. We're calling here for a minister dedicated to rebuilding trust in public institutions. And on the social cohesion front, we're advocating for a renewal of multiculturalism and anti-racism, reflecting the damage that's been done to our diverse social fabric during the past 2.5 years. We're calling as well for the improvement of the conduct of national election campaigns, including the creation of a National Debates Commission to ensure that we get the debates that we are entitled to and deserve as a democratic society. And finally, calling for measures of more than just GDP when it comes to national welfare. Again, part of a national conversation that has already started, and I know that the Federal Treasurer is already flagging a wellbeing budget coming up later in October. As the 47th Parliament sits for the first time this week, we can think of no better time than to put forward some ideas, some solutions, if you will, for the nation to consider. Well, with that, it's now, and And don't forget Menti. If you haven't already joined us there, questions are going to come to you very, very shortly. And in fact, we will put some questions to you now. We're interested in hearing from you what you think the mood of the nation is. So if you're already logged on to Menti, you will find that we're asking you to give us 3 words that you think capture the national mood right now. And if you could enter those 3 words, I'll give you a moment, and pretty soon after you enter your answers, you'll get another prompt for a question about how you rate trust in our scientists, trust in our elected representatives, trust in our academics, trust in our media. We're interested in hearing what you think the state of trust is at the moment. Great to see some responses coming through already. And finally, we want to get your responses to our recommendations themselves. So are there recommendations that we are putting forward which resonate with you, which you support? Are there recommendations that you don't like? We'd love to hear your thoughts via Menti as well. So keep going with Menti if you're already logged in. But in the meantime, I'd now like to introduce the Honourable Andrew Leigh MP, the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury. Unfortunately, due to Parliament sitting this week, he's not able to join us in person, but he has sent us a video message to officially launch this Open Society Common Purpose Task Force. I'll throw now to the Honourable Andrew Leigh MP.
G'day, my name's Andrew Leigh, the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury. And it's a real pleasure to have been invited today to launch the Open Society Common Purpose Second Task Force report, the Great Australian Renovation. I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose lands I'm speaking to you from today. Daranuna, Daranunawal, Yongu, Nalamanyan, Dunimanyan, Nanawalwari, Darawari, Dindi, Wangaralin, and acknowledge any Indigenous people present at the launch today. A report titled The Great Australian Renovation is like grand designs for the country. I love this report because it is both grounded in expertise and data, but crafted with a sense of love and kindness. There's a gentleness that runs through the report and a sense of quiet ambition for the nation. It is a huge credit to the work of Tim Soutphommasane, who has headed Sydney Policy Lab in recent years, and who hands over to Kate Brennan an organisation in fine nick on the 1st of August. This important report has a number of key themes. It looks at children, at trust, and at social cohesion. And those themes dovetail very closely with my passions, particularly in the charities portfolio. Australia's charities have a powerful role to play in building a reconnected Australia. But over recent years, the trends haven't been good. If you ask Australians in the mid-1980s how many friends they had, they gave a number that is twice as high on average than they do today. The same is true if you ask how many of their neighbours people know. Over this period, we've seen a drop in the number of Australian organisations per person, and we've seen a decline in the share of Australians who are joiners, joining up to local community, social or sporting organisations. Since the start of the century, Australians have been less likely to play an organised sport. We've seen a steady drop in the volunteering rate, confirmed in the recent Australian census figures. If you look back at the end of World War II, half of Australians regularly attended religious services. Now that number is down to just 1 in 7. If you look to the early 1980s, half of the Australian workforce were in a trade union. Now that number is down to about 1 in 7. In short, Australia has become more disconnected. We've moved from being a nation of we to a nation of me. My ambition as Assistant Minister for Charities is to work to turn that around, to engage constructively with the community sector, not just ending the war on charities which was waged by the former government, but also looking at creative ways of doubling philanthropy, of encouraging a greater culture of joining and volunteering and giving back to the community. That notion of rebuilding trust that is in the taskforce report is one which is fundamental to the role that I think Australian charities can play with a government that is willing to support them, not undermine them. To build a more reconnected Australia will require huge work, not just from government, but also across society. In Reconnected, we talked about some of the notions that might guide this. The principle of cyber connecting, using electronic technologies to bolster face-to-face interactions rather than supplant them. The idea of Sutton's law of social capital, that social capital builders should go where the need is greatest. And the emphasis on multiculturalism in the taskforce report is an important way in which we need to look at building social capital. We also talk about double plus good social capital, allowing people the opportunity to tick 2 boxes, such as the Good Gym, a British initiative which pairs up people who want to do more running with isolated seniors. The runner gets their sneakers on a Saturday morning and goes for a run to the home of an isolated senior where they have a cup of tea, and then they run back home. The senior is referred to as the coach because they're the person that gets the runner out of bed on a Saturday morning. Then they've ticked 2 boxes, community engagement and getting fit at the same time. The taskforce's emphasis on young people is absolutely vital here. In order to ensure that we have greater upsurge of civic culture, we have to make sure that volunteering and giving back aren't merely the province of the greatest generation of the baby boomers. We need to look at creative, new, nimble organisations which can fill a void in engaging Australians one with another. Park Run has been an important initiative based on one of the principles of simplicity. 8 a.m. every Saturday, and it's always free. Initiatives like that might have a lot to teach those of us who are looking for other initiatives which might help to engage in disadvantaged communities. Your focus too on ensuring that Parliament works as effectively as possible has got to be fundamental to the standing of parliamentarians. A surprising amount of discourse in Parliament is conducted courteously and has many ideas in it. But the conduct of question time often leads people to shake their heads. Indeed, when I speak to student groups who are coming to Parliament, I'll even feel forced to apologise for the conduct they're about to witness in question time. As many kids and parents say, it's not how we'd be allowed to behave around the dinner table at home. So thank you for the really important work that the task force members have done. Thanks to the work of the Sydney Policy Lab under Tim and soon under Kate. It is an important Australian institution, and this notion of the Great Australian Renovation is an exciting one which I believe can mobilise support right across the community. Let the Great Australian Renovation commence.
Well, a big thank you there to Andrew Lee, and I couldn't steal his line about this being about grand designs for the nation, tempting though it was. If I can now invite our panellists to join us up the front here, and while they come up, and I'll introduce them very shortly, I wanted to take you through what you've said to us via Menti. And we did ask you a question about how you feel about the nation at the moment. And to set the scene a little, we thought we'd share with you the mood that we captured prior to the election in the groups that we consulted with. This was the word cloud that came through our conversations and discussions. We got a picture of an anxious, fatigued, exhausted, tired nation. And I know that in recent weeks we have had reflection about whether there's been a shift in the national mood, which brings me to what you have told us just this afternoon. This is the word cloud drawn upon your responses via Menti. Exhausted? You're still exhausted, is what you're telling us. You're still anxious, but fascinating to see hope enter the picture there. You are hopeful, is what I'm hearing and seeing. Cautious. It's still an uncertain world. You're intrigued, perhaps, by the Parliament sitting this week and what lies ahead. but an ambivalent picture coming through there, perhaps a reflection of how we are in a moment where things could go either way right now. Let's very quickly too get a sense of what you've told us about some of the other questions that we've posed to you. How do you rate the public trust in the following groups? Well, perhaps not surprisingly for an audience at a university, strong trust in scientists, strong trust in academics, not so strong when it comes to media and politics. And finally, a quick snapshot of your responses to our proposals and recommendations. Very strong endorsement there around the idea of measuring more than GDP, and some moderate support too for some of our other ideas. Just a very quick snapshot of your responses. I hope it gives you a window into the digital engagement tools that we've been using through our consultation, given the fact that we haven't been able to do much of our work in person and have had to do it online. But a big thank you to our partners, Essential Media and Peter Lewis and the Civility Platform, which has supported our work in recent months. Now we'll turn to our panel, and I might invite Professor Ben Murray, Swapnik Senagavarapu, Joe Schofield, and Marie Thiessen to join us. And I'll join them at the end here as well, and we're going to have a quick conversation. A brief introduction of the panel. Over on that end, we have Professor Ben Murray, who is an infectious diseases specialist and paediatrician, the co-director of Sydney Infectious Disease Institute here at Sydney. Welcome, Ben, and a member of our task force, I should add. We have next to him Swapnik Senagavarapu, who is a student here at the university, an arts law student currently doing his honours year in political economy, and a former president of the Student Representative Council. Welcome, Swapnik. Jo Schofield joins us. She is the president of the United Workers Union and a member of our task force. Thank you, Jo. And here on my immediate left is Professor Marie Thiessen, Director of the Matilda Centre and also the Chair of Australia's Mental Health Think Tank here at the University of Sydney. We've got a few minutes to have a bit of a discussion. We're going to collect questions from you online and also here in the room. But Swapnik, I want to start with you because we want to centre the voice of young people and youth, and it's only natural that we begin with you. Can I ask you, we've asked everyone else who they trust. Who do you trust as a young person, Swapnik?
It's a good question, Tim. It's unfortunate to say probably not that many people. I think there is quite a real sense in which a lot of sort of official institutions and people who otherwise ought to have a degree of responsibility towards young people, there's a feeling in which they have sort of abdicated their duties or failed in those responsibilities. I think to a large degree, there has definitely been a feeling in the past couple of years over the pandemic that elected officials and politicians have really failed young people. With a new parliament sitting, let's hope that that turns around. And, you know, there are certainly some positive signs. There are also some probably not so positive ones as well. And it's really only time that will tell whether this trust rises across the board.
And Swapnik, one of the messages that came through very strongly for us at the task force was this sense that young people have made enormous sacrifices and have had to carry a profoundly large burden during the pandemic. Can you talk us through some of the experiences that you and your peers have had during the past 2.5 years?
Yeah, definitely. I think I might have to generalize a little bit, but I think there are probably two sets of impacts that young people have really faced across this pandemic. The first is what I'd probably describe as a social impact. There's a real sense in which many people of my age have lost, the crucial years of their lives, the best years of your life at university, in your early 20s, as you're exiting high school and coming into the world, the sense in which you're free and able to explore and develop yourself has certainly been constrained, whether that's, in as simple things as not being able to go out and make friends and, have new experiences or travel, but also in the sense that I think a lot of people have really retreated socially. So it's difficult for a lot of people to sort of build those organic connections that they would have in years gone by. And I think the second dimension is much more of a material one. I'm sure Joe will talk about this a lot, but, young people work overwhelmingly in, very precarious and casualized industries. industries that really, bore the brunt of the pandemic. And, there were a lot of impacts on young people's employment and incomes. And more than that, I think there is certainly a path dependency with all of this, as the economy contracted and as all of the various crises unfolded. It's certainly been the case that, the future prospects for young people in terms of their material well-being has really been restricted.
Well, we'll come to those material questions shortly, but Ben Murray, I wanted to bring you in as a paediatrician and infectious diseases expert. We're seeing a new wave surging at the moment when it comes to COVID, and we know very well that the hospital system is under pressure again. This task force report has made a very strong argument around schools needing to be open and the lessons that we need to learn from the past 2.5 years. How do you reflect on the lessons that we've learnt over the past 2.5 years? Have we learnt the right lessons?
Tim, I would say that there's many lessons still to be learned, but I think the report captures some of the important lessons that we missed out on, I think, in those panic-filled early months. And one of those important lessons is that schools are essential for the well-being of children, and that closing schools or forcing children into modes of action that we think will protect the rest of society, if it's not for their own benefit, is really creating long-term harms. And I don't think that was always taken into consideration in our initial decision-making, and we now have the opportunity to reflect on that, which doesn't make the answers any easier, but it forces us, I think, to think about the long-term well-being of children and young people as well.
Joe Schofield, can I bring you in? It hasn't just been children and young people who've been disadvantaged during the pandemic. As we note in the report, there have been other groups, including those working in insecure areas of work in the economy, doing essential work, who've had to bear a big burden. You're the leader of a union that represents some of these workers. How do you think these rifts can be repaired in our society?
Well, I think for many workers, what we saw was, it was workers in low-paid occupations, predominantly women, that were most impacted by having to work in essential services, aged care workers. Some of our members in aged care could have earned more on JobKeeper or JobSeeker than they earned on their hourly rate, and we saw not only that, but they faced intense pressure and increases of workload, production, whether it was in food processing, in the care economy, or the like. And I think that these sort of problems of low pay, insecure work, undervaluing, particularly women's work in the care sector, have all been with us for a long time. And we know about those problems, but the pandemic really shone a light on, how important that work is and remains, and that, for the fissures in the labour market, if you like. And there are many public policy solutions to these problems. Secure work, ending casualisation, greater regulation and rights for workers and a voice for workers, the ability to bargain. And these are all tried and tested solutions that are within our grasp if we choose to take them. I mean, for me, the lesson from the pandemic was really that it just laid bare, and who would have thought that the most disadvantaged people in our society would die in greater numbers, would face poorer health outcomes and access to services and support when they needed it, and will continue to bear the longer term and more arduous impacts of COVID. So I think that that's a wake-up call to us.
Indeed, a big wake-up call. And Marie, if I can bring you in, it feels like we've had a wake-up call too around mental health as a result of the pandemic. And we know about the serious effects that COVID-19, the related lockdowns and restrictions have had on people's mental health. We've talked a lot about trust, Marie. Can I ask you, does societal well-being and mental health have any bearing on the trust issue that the task force has been looking into?
Thanks, Tim. And when yourself and Mark and Nick said, let's call this the Great Australian Renovation, I was like, really? having been through a few myself. But boy, oh boy, do we need a renovation, and we really need much more than just a lick of paint here. And I think the kids of Australia will say that to you really strongly. Swapnik just said that really clearly. Why? Because their mental health has really suffered. And if you're talking about trust, treating people equally is what is at the heart and foundation of trust. And we are not treating people equally in this community. On Friday, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released its annual report on how many young people in this country, people across the board, but young people in particular, have a diagnosed mental illness. 40% of 16 to 25-year-olds. I get the shivers when I hear that number. And people say, well, is this just the snowflake generation? Like, is this just people a little bit worried? I can tell you this is not people a little bit worried. So if what I'm about to say upsets people, call out for help. But every week I get people calling out to help for me. Every week I get parents calling me saying that my child has stopped eating and their heart is going to stop. They're going to die. I get people calling out to me saying my child has cut themselves so significantly I need to take them to the emergency department. I get people calling out to me every week saying, my child has sat me down at night to say, life is no longer worth living. This is 12-year-olds. So please don't think about this as a snowflake generation. Please hear the voices of these young people. And please make sure that they are both seen and heard.
Thank you, Marie. Now, we've got time for some questions, so we're going to take some questions from our online audience. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. Some questions here from the audience in the room too. I believe we have some questions from Pat McGorry and Nick Coatsworth on Zoom. Is that right, Steph?
Yeah, that's right. Marie has touched on Pat McGorry's question, which was about the teenagers and the effects that they've suffered, and the new report that came out last Friday. So I think we've covered that one now. But Nick Coatsworth would like to know how we should better manage the divergence of expert views on COVID-19 to develop a more productive discourse and enhance trust in expert opinion. So has the pandemic enhanced or diminished the cause of evidence-based policy making?
Okay, hold your thoughts. I'm going to get a question from the audience live in the room here too, and then we'll put a pair of questions to our panel. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for Ben and Marie both, I guess. I have a daughter with special needs, and she's in year 8 in a support class. And when we tried to make her learn about using a mask 2 years ago to go to school or go wherever, now how do we unlearn? She's not letting go of mask for the last 2 years. It's very difficult, though. Children obviously are important, but even then, children with special needs, we have completely forgotten their needs, how they go to school, what happens to them. And it's really interesting to see if there's anything thought about that.
Okay, so a question there about how kids can learn, given that they might need to wear masks, and a question from Nick Coatsworth about the divergence of expert opinion and the effect that it has on trust. Sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Let's go to the trust question first. Ben, Marie, you're the scientists on the panel here. What happens when scientists disagree?
Well, I should say, first of all, at the beginning of the epidemic, we should all recognize that we were operating in an area of uncertainty. And there's lots of uncertainty remaining. In a free democratic society, you will always have divergent opinions. And we need to learn how to tolerate that without necessarily becoming enemies of each other. So it's a difficult balance where I think the idea, maybe science in the past have communicated with the average community as if science know the answers. I think science sometimes just know which are the questions to ask. And it can take a long time to find the correct answers. And in that period where answers are forthcoming, they need to be tested against reality all the time. And we have increasing confidence in the right solution or the right answer. So coming up with quick fix answers is not really the scientific way. We all have to get comfortable that we have to live through uncertainty and be guided by the best available evidence at the time. not suppressing any of the voices that may be dissenting, because sometimes those are important. But that's why I think national structures where there's an informed debate by recognized leaders in the field, and then ultimately you will need a decision that needs to be made not on emotional or political grounds, but truly guiding the best interest of the community now and into the future. Those mechanisms, I think, we haven't spent enough time unpacking what they should look like in a democratic society. And I don't have the answer, but it definitely needs more thinking and discussion.
It's a big question. Marie, that question about unlearning, can I get your thoughts on that?
I think that the example you gave is just so important and such a strong example of what we're talking about. Like, the fear that we created is such a blunt instrument, and your daughter or son is feeling that. And that's why the renovation theme was really important to me. And we heard from Andrew Lee that reconnecting, but we have to think about different ways to do that. You're absolutely right. We've got to do a bit of unlearning. We used the blunt instrument to incredible effect, but let's also now think about what that means for our next generation connecting. So it's just a really great example of that.
And Swapnik, can I go back to that question around trust? I mean, how do you respond to situations where there are competing sources of advice of an expert kind?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure there's a specifically youth answer for these kind of deep social epistemological questions. But I think one of the things is that we don't really have civil society institutions that are capable of absorbing this kind of debate and dissent in a productive way anymore, particularly not for young people. I mean, Andrew Lee spoke about, the decline in trade union membership and decline in organisation membership. There is a sense in which the sort of collective reality of young people is shaped in very narrow sort of online spaces, and it's difficult to have a sort of social apparatus to resolve these competing claims about the world if you're not really connected to society as such. So I think the task force and the report's emphasis on rebuilding civil society institutions is probably the first step towards mediating these kind of debates in a much more productive way. Thanks,
Swapnik. Jo?
I really liked Ben's answer about the uncertainty and learning how to respond in uncertainty, and too often our politics and now our science becomes a contested terrain where people line up on different sides of debates. And certainly that's the experience in industrial relations that we live with every day. In terms of trust, what we saw from our union, and it would be the same for other unions around the country in particular, was a big growth in our membership. We provided a lot of information. People came to the union because they trusted the advice that we were giving them, because they were very uncertain by all the competing messages out there. And that would be the same with community organisations and other civil society organisations. What you saw was, particularly in those lockdown areas, was, the voice of the community, and those local networks of trust and community were really very strong in carrying people through. So that filled the gap a little bit, but, in the longer term, we should be able to build that so people, feel confident and comfortable all the time.
Thank you, Jo. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. So there's a question at the back there, and if anyone wants to also pose a question, this is your final opportunity before we wrap up.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your insights. My name is Do. I work with Settlement Services International in the settlement space. And part of today's launch touch on the impact of COVID in young people, but also the impact of COVID across different communities, diverse communities. What I haven't seen and really interested to hear opinions here is around the impact of media coverage on the instances that have happened through COVID, which have kind of demoralized communities, and particularly cultural communities, and brought further, if we're talking about COVID mental health impact here, you have also the media mental health impact. And how do we deal with those things?
Thank you for your question. Panel, thoughts on the effect that media coverage has had on our social unity and division?
It's a hard one to know what's the standard we expect from media. Media may say we're a business, we're there to sell a paper, we tell people what they want to hear. People love crises, they like a villain. But clearly, if that's harming society, we need to rethink. I think one of the things that I was most aware of, working in Western Sydney, was that we need to find better mechanisms to listen to communities. And we had huge problems with vaccination uptake, for instance, in parts of Western Sydney, until there was a concerted effort to listen and understand the issues at hand and speak to the community leaders that are locally respected, and then vaccine uptake just took off. So it was really finding out what communities are telling us and having our ear on the ground and maybe creating those mechanisms that those listening devices are in place, which would, I think, stand our democracy in good stead as well.
Thank you, Ben. I think we've got time for one final question from our new Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research. Emma, please.
Thanks, Tim. Emma Johnson here. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Over the last 5 years, most of our community have been also impacted by so-called natural disasters, extreme events that have been accelerated and increased in their intensity by climate change. Over the next decade, we will expect more and more of that. How do you think, as a society, we can build the resilience of our communities to the extreme events and our disaster response capability?
Let's make this the final question for the panel. Marie, resilience.
Yep. Oh, I was going to take my mask off too, but I think I'll leave it on. Emma, I think what you're talking about, we talked about this in terms of the pandemic, but every single one of these recommendations and issues here also relates to the increased stresses that our community is under from climate change and significant events. So when we talk about children and young people, they're at the forefront of that. So, everything that we talk about in here, children for youth, ministers for youth, they really need to be focusing broadly, not just on the pandemic responses, but the issues that are going to face us in the future, like the climate change. And then our ability to have those conversations. It was incredible to see the launch of your report last week, and incredible to see the community dialogue around that. But how do you keep that going beyond just the launch of a report? We need organisations and institutions that are willing to keep having these uncomfortable conversations. So I think it's those structural things. That renovation issue, we do need the renovation, put the liquor paint on it so that we can actually be resilient to the things, those shocks that are coming more and more.
Thank you, Marie. As with all renovations, we're running a bit behind time and behind schedule. So I might just wrap up our panel discussion there. Mark, I assure you we're still under budget. It's all good. But will you join me in thanking our panel, Ben Murray, Swapnik Senagabarapu, Joe Schofield, Marie Thiessen. And now it's my great pleasure to invite my co-chair of the task force, Mark Rigotti, to conclude today's event. Mark is the Chief Executive Officer Designate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and starts in that role today, in fact. So, Mark, wonderful to have you join us on your first day in your new job, and over to you to conclude today's event.
Thank you. Well, my job's the easy one, is to say thank you and to wrap up. And it is my first day on the new job. I've even got my new shoes on, like your kids get when they go back to school. But thank you, Tim. Great effort in leading the group and in leading today. Thanks also to Yvonne Weldon, to Mark Scott, Andrew Lee and our panel for your reflections today. Could I also just call out some other task force members and expert advisors, including Peter Lewis, Nick Bryant, Nick Davis, Dennis Glover, Stephanie Wood and the staff at the Sydney Policy Lab. And finally, my deepest thanks to all of those that we consulted on the way to get to the end of the report. At a personal level, it was a wonderful process because I got exposed to so many different sort of thoughts and views, and I learned a lot, particularly from some of the young people and the community leaders who gave up their time to make a contribution. As we all know, witness the scene today with us all wearing our masks again, the COVID pandemic is not over. But the time is still right to turn our attention to Australia's recovery. And over the past few months, we've spoken with a number of experts and representatives of different sectors and communities, and you can see them listed in the back of the report. The picture that emerged was one of a country in need of a renovation. And the report and the work that was done highlighted the strong foundations from which that renovation could take place. But it also revealed cracks and problems and opportunities, I guess, places for solutions to be applied. And that is where the report aims. One that I particularly resonated for me was the need to renovate our society on behalf of our children and our young people. They sacrificed enormously to protect older Australians, and we see a need to repay those forgotten heroes of the COVID pandemic. On behalf of the Taskforce members, can I once again thank all our speakers and audience for coming along today, and for all of you for attending either online or in person. Also to Mark Scott, to Chancellor Belinda Hutchinson and the University of Sydney for sponsoring and supporting the work of the Taskforce. It's been a pleasure to have been invited to co-chair it. I think projects such as this also demonstrate what public universities can do in bringing together leaders of different disciplines and places to generate ideas and hopefully solutions. And as we continue our ongoing battle with this pandemic and we face economic challenges and some of the things that Mark Scott talked about, we should not be tempted to point fingers or think that with a new government everything will be fixed. We are part of the solution. We need to reflect on how our leaders, experts and communities performed during the pandemic and what lessons we can take forward, but we can all step into those solutions. And we hope that this report captures some ideas for those solutions. So with that, that is the end of today. There's some refreshments for those who'd like to remain on board. And for those that attended online, we do thank you for participating. There was a few names from people in Canberra and other places, so thank you very much. And I'll draw today to a close. Thank you very much.